者の方、お二人とも記者の方。
記者です。
はい。そこを叩いてるんですが、いかがでしょうか。
さやかさん。
今 right, we are now in session. Thank you all for coming to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Martin Fackler, and I will be the MC for today's event. And it is our great pleasure to welcome two special guests. The first is Her Imperial Highness, Princess Takamado, who is the Honorary President of BirdLife International. And to her right is Dr. Stuart Butchart, Chief Scientist at BirdLife International. BirdLife International represents about 120 countries and organizations in those countries about the protection and preservation of wild birds. And without any further ado, I will turn the floor first over to Her Highness, and then after that to Dr. Butchart.
Okay. Thank you very much for that nice introduction. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Princess Takamado, the Honorary President of BirdLife International. I took over the role from Queen Noor of Jordan in 2004, so I've been Honorary President for quite a long time now. When one calls a press conference, and I think we've had quite a lot of press conferences around the world in recent days, it's usually because there are important statements that have to be made by governments, there have been important meetings, there have been dramatic incidents that have to be explained. Perhaps somebody has won an award or a medal or a prize. We are lauding people's achievements, etc. In comparison to that, perhaps the reason for calling this press conference or asking for this press conference may pale in significance. However, it is exactly because there is so much attention being paid to sometimes exciting but more recently horrifying news that takes place around the world. And every time we watch the news on television or we open a newspaper, we find dramatic things happening. But in the background, climate change is here. Climate change is happening, it is real, and it is affecting all of us. And the problem is that it is accelerating in pace. When we had the closing of the Hormuz Straits recently, and we all started panicking about the oil that we are not going to be able to use, it really brought home to me the fact that despite the fact that since 1992, when we had the Rio Earth Summit, and we had all the time in the world to think of alternative energies, we are still incredibly reliant on fossil fuel. And when we're talking about carbon emissions, fossil fuel is not the right way to be going, but we obviously need it. Japan has just released a large quantity of oil. So all this is happening in the background, but climate change is happening. I am, as I said, the Honorary President of BirdLife International, and as it was introduced, BirdLife International is an international organization. It has a long history, and Stuart Butchart will be explaining more in detail about the work that we do. But the work that we do, and he's going to find it slightly difficult to say this, is highly regarded the world over for being science-based. Our science team is amazing, and Dr. Stuart Butchart is our chief scientist. We have data that we have accumulated over the years, the result of a huge amount of hard work by our scientists. The data has been analyzed, and it is out, open, and available for international organizations, for different governments, large NGOs, small NPOs. It is available for everybody to use because without data, nobody can move any project. The frightening thing that is because there is so much going around in the world, there is not just less attention, but we notice that there is a weaker international cooperation, and climate change is something that needs international cooperation. Problem also is that a lot of funds are going in different directions, meaning that there is less funding available to deal with climate change. All these are frightening facts that we have to realize are there. And as I've been to the Foreign Correspondents' Club many times before, I am a huge believer in journalism and the power of the word, the written word, the spoken word, the power of journalism. And I wanted to ask for this press conference because I am the honorary president's office of BirdLife International is in Japan. And we do not often have the chief scientist here in Japan. So to me, it seemed an extremely appropriate moment to ask for a press conference. And without any further ado, he is our chief scientist of our prize of the BirdLife International team, and he will speak to you more in detail of the work that we do and what birds can show you as barometers or indicators of the environment, because this planet Earth is the one we have, the only one we know, and if we can get people on the moon, we should be able to do more for this planet. So, Stuart.
Thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. As you have heard, I have the privilege of being Chief Scientist at BirdLife International, which is the world's largest partnership of national nature conservation organizations. 124 partners in 119 countries around the world, including the Wild Bird Society of Japan here. And our goal is to conserve the world's birds, their habitats, and global biodiversity more generally, working with people to towards more sustainable use of natural resources. And as Her Imperial Highness explained, we wanted to focus on climate change today because the global media cycle tends to focus on the latest news stories. The stories you write, the stories the media cover are the latest economic developments, the latest disasters around the world, conflicts, or the latest pronouncements by the current US president. I put together this PowerPoint a few weeks ago, and already the headlines I picked there have been superseded by even more significant ones in the last few days. But as we just heard, climate change remains probably the most important factor that is going to change our world in the coming years and decades. It swamps the significance of the topics that dominate news coverage. Despite that, a poll last year by Nippon.com showed that awareness of climate change was lower in Japan than any other of 32 countries surveyed, and Japanese people have the lowest confidence that their government is taking sufficient action to address the climate crisis. Furthermore, an investigation by the Ministry of Environment in 2023 found that 15% of people in Japan express skepticism about climate change or opposition to the widespread adoption of renewable energy. And this is a real problem because climate change is already having devastating impacts on people, whether through floods or wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, heat waves. These kind of things are threatening the very essentials of life that people need: food, water, health, and security. And the impacts of climate change and these severe events tend to be disproportionately felt by the poorest people in the poorest countries. And you can see here just a few statistics of some of the recent ways in which climate change is impacting people. And worryingly, these impacts are only projected to worsen. We're going to see millions more people being exposed to malnutrition because of lower crop yields, many more exposed to diseases like malaria. Up to 1 billion people are likely to be displaced over the rest of this century as a result of extreme weather events, droughts, sea level rise, and other impacts. And here in Japan, half of Japan's population and about half of its industrial output are threatened by sea level rise, storm surges, typhoons, coastal erosion, and these sorts of impacts that are being exacerbated by climate change. And as well as impacting people, climate change will have, and indeed is already having, disastrous consequences for nature. This in turn is driving ever more climate change. As we chop down the world's forests, these are releasing greenhouse gas emissions, and those greenhouse gases are driving further climate change. But that loss of biodiversity will also impact people directly because nature underpins our health, our economies, and our livelihoods. So why am I, representing a bird conservation organisation, telling you about this? It's because birds are useful messengers when it comes to climate change, showing us how climate is impacting nature and pointing us to the solutions that are needed. And that's because birds are excellent biodiversity indicators, acting as barometers for wider environmental health. And this is for a number of reasons. They are widespread, being found in all countries and virtually all habitats. Their distribution, behavior, and ecology are better understood than for most other types of organisms. They're mobile and responsive to environmental change, and their population trends often mirror those of other groups of species. And because they're relatively straightforward to detect, identify, and monitor and count, they are more straightforward to monitor than most other groups of organisms. And then finally, because they're so popular and engaging, there is an army of bird watchers around the world collecting information on them. 45 million in the US by one estimate, 40,000 in Brazil. The membership of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK is more than 1 million. Huge numbers of people out there watching birds, tracking their changes, which we can use to tell us about how the wider environment is changing. So what do they tell us about the state of nature and the impacts of climate change on it? Well, the news is not good, and these impacts are generally negative, and they're projected to grow substantially. Indeed, BirdLife's data show that climate change is one of the most significant threats to the world's birds, shown in this graphic, which illustrates the different types of threats and their relative importance through the size of the circles. And you can see that climate change is up there with unsustainable agriculture, logging, invasive species, and unsustainable use, hunting and trapping, as the major threats to the world's birds. Now, there are multiple ways in which climate change is causing issues, and I'm going to give you a few examples. As temperatures rise, montane species found in mountain ecosystems, are being forced to move to higher elevations in order to stay within their climatic limits. And this results in substantial population declines and even local extirpations as the area of suitable climate disappears. Here in Japan, a temperature rise of 2 degrees is projected to lead to a reduction of 50% in the population of this species, the rock ptarmigan, which is found in the Japanese Alps. And a 3-degree rise would result in a decrease of 80%. To address this, in response, there's now an intensive conservation program led by Professor Nakamura at Shinzu University and supported by the Ministry of the Environment. And they are aiming to help reduce the mortality of young chicks by caging them at night to protect them from predators and exposure. And they're trying to boost the population in the Central Alps through captive breeding and release. These images show what is projected to happen in the Albertine Rift of East Africa. So here we are looking, it's a 3-dimensional graphic. We're looking north up the Albertine Rift. On the right-hand side is Uganda. On the left-hand side is the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the colors are showing the richness of the community of montane birds that are restricted to these mountains. And you can see that over the course of this century, the bird populations are retreating to higher elevations and shifting north. The redder colors show more higher species richness. The yellow color shows lower. And so you can see that there will be reductions in the total area of distribution. There'll be some local losses and increased extinction risk of these species. Similarly, species are moving towards the poles. They're having to shift their distributions to track where their suitable climate is. In Japan, the greater white-fronted goose has recently begun to winter at Lake Otomanuma in Akita Prefecture, 180 kilometers northwest of its main wintering site at Lake Izunuma, Uchinuma in Miyagi Prefecture in northern Honshu. Forgive my pronunciations of the names of these places. All across the world, species are moving northwards in the northern hemisphere, southwards in the southern hemisphere. In North America, the Canada jay has shifted its distribution 19 kilometers further north over the last 26 years. But warmer temperatures in the autumn have been linked to reduced breeding success because the seeds and nuts that these birds bury and store to feed on through the winter are now perishing because of the warmer temperatures. And as a consequence of these range shifts, many species will suffer from population declines. For example, about half of the distribution of the lilac-breasted roller, this beautiful bird found in eastern and southern Africa, only half of its current distribution is projected to remain suitable by 2085. While the Ethiopian bush crow, restricted to a small area in the Horn of Africa, 90% of its distribution is projected to be unsuitable within 50 years. For coastal and island species, sea level rise is an additional threat. This graph shows the maximum elevation of islands in the Pacific to which different species are restricted. And you can see that for species like the Polynesian ground dove or the Tuamotu sandpiper, are highly vulnerable even to a moderate degree of sea level rise. For some species, the loss of sea ice driven by warming temperatures is causing declines. Adelie penguin populations in the South Shetland Islands have more than halved since the 1970s, owing to decreases in sea ice extent. And on the map here, you can see that the blue color shows the average extent of sea ice in recent decades, and the two shades of brown show the total maximum amount of ice in 2022 and 23. And there's been a similar pattern in the last few years. We're seeing substantial losses of ice in these ecosystems, which has knock-on consequences for all the species that occur there. The pattern's nearly as bad in the Arctic, where loss of sea ice in spring in the Sea of Okhotsk, west of the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, is threatening populations of the Steller sea eagle, an iconic bird of prey that winters here in Japan in Hokkaido. And even in the places where they survive, many species are experiencing population declines. The Atlantic puffin on the left here is currently declining at a rate exceeding 50% over 3 generations, owing to climate-induced shifts in fish stocks. While in Japan, we're seeing declines in species like the meadow bunting, which prefers early successional habitats like open forest and grasslands. And across entire bird communities, climate change is driving trends. These graphs show the average population trends of bird species that are projected to benefit from climate change because they're warm adapted. That's the line in brown. And the population trends of those that are cold adapted and expected to suffer under climate change, shown in blue. And you can see that since the 1980s to 90s, there's a clear signal of climate change on bird population trends. And importantly, there are many more losers than winners. There's about 2 or 3 times as many species in the group with the blue trends than there is in the group with the brown trends. Climate change is also disrupting the timing of biological phenomena. Between 1978 and 2005, chestnut-cheeked starlings here in Japan laid their eggs 15 days earlier on average. But the flowering of cherry trees has advanced by only 8 days, so that shortens the gap between the two by 7 days. In the 1970s, cherries were the main food source for the chicks of this species, but they're now not sufficiently in fruit when the chicks need feeding, and that's reducing breeding success. Climate change is also going to exacerbate other threats like invasive species or diseases. It's predicted that dengue fever could reach Hokkaido in the coming years, while avian malaria, which is an introduced disease affecting native birds in Hawaii, will have catastrophic impacts on the birds there because the mosquitoes that carry the disease can penetrate at ever higher elevations as temperatures warm, leaving the birds with no safe refuge. The graph here shows that the area of forest with low malaria risk will shrink as temperatures rise. And this renders native species like the Maui parrotbill, the bird shown here, at high risk of extinction because there's already only about 100 mature individuals of this species surviving. So every additional rise in temperature increases the threat that the species will go extinct. But despite the significant impacts of climate change, there is hope. Birds can help us identify the actions that are needed, and BirdLife is at the forefront of efforts to implement what are called nature-based solutions, safeguarding healthy ecosystems to benefit both nature and people. The most important thing we need to do is reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to do this as fast as we can to buy enough time to enable as many species to survive the coming century. But we need to make sure that transition from fossil fuels to clean energy is achieved in a way that doesn't have unintended consequences for nature. Poorly sited wind farms, power lines, solar facilities, and other renewable energy infrastructure can pose a threat to birds through collisions and electrocution. BirdLife have developed a specific tool to help support the renewable energy sector, enabling these developments to be sited in locations that minimize the risks to birds. The Avian Sensitivity Tool for Energy Planning, AVASTEP as we call it, is a free online mapping resource that provides a detailed spatial assessment of where are the locations that would be most sensitive to renewable energy development. And it can be used to support national scale strategic planning or site level screening. But we also need to prevent greenhouse gas emissions resulting from conversion of natural habitats that are carbon rich, like forests or peatlands, to human-modified habitats. If we chop down all the trees, we're releasing all that carbon dioxide and exacerbating climate change. And where forests and other natural habitats have become degraded, we need to restore them. These activities benefit people through mitigating climate change, but they benefit species through conserving their ecosystems. And I'll give you 3 quick examples of the sorts of nature-based solutions that are being implemented by BirdLife partners. In the Philippines, the Haribon Foundation is protecting forests on Luzon to safeguard watersheds, prevent deforestation, and save the Philippine eagle, this extraordinary-looking bird of prey. In West Africa, the Conservation Society of Sierra Leone are taking action to reduce deforestation in the Gola Rainforest National Park, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while providing livelihood support to local communities, such as through low-intensity cocoa farming and financing this through carbon credits. That's benefiting species like the pygmy hippopotamus, the West African chimpanzee, and the white-breasted rockfowl. And then lastly, in the grasslands of South America, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Uruguay, BirdLife partners are working with ranchers to promote more sustainable grazing practices, certifying these in order to enable these farmers to charge a premium for bird-friendly beef. And that's ensuring a sustainable livelihood for over 700 ranchers on 1 million hectares of grasslands, benefiting more than 200 of the species that are found in this area, and enhancing carbon storage for the long term. But we know that substantial climate change is already going to happen. So it's critical that we help species to adapt to this, buying them time until we can stabilize the climate. So this includes enhancing connectivity to enable species to track shifts in suitable climatic conditions. From wildlife corridors to reforesting areas between habitat patches, we're taking action to help biodiversity survive under climate change. But civil society organisations like BirdLife can only do so much. It's only governments who have the ultimate responsibility for the scale of actions that are needed. And across the world, governments are failing to do enough, fast enough, as shown by a few headlines here. Here in Japan, the country relies on fossil fuels for more than 2/3 of its energy currently, and its per capita emissions are double the global average. Within the G7 group of countries, Japan is right at the bottom in terms of deployment of renewable energies. And although the entire G7, including Japan, have committed to phase out coal-fired electricity in the first half of the 2030s, there is no national plan yet to achieve this. Under the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Japanese government of Japan have committed to reduce carbon emissions by 46% by 2030, 60% by 2035. But this is far short of what's needed in order to keep global temperature rises below 1.5 degrees. And this really contrasts with strong business commitment. Japanese companies lead the world in terms of the numbers setting emissions reduction targets, so in other words, committing to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions under the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And virtually all senior business leaders want Japan to transition to renewable energy, many of them within the next decade. This is good for the planet, but it's also good for business. And as we've just heard referred to, the spike in oil prices over the last week or two is going to have consequences for businesses here and across the world. So Japan risks missing out on the economic benefits of a safe energy transition without greater government action. Later this year will be the next meeting of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP31 in Turkey. We need to see governments there bringing forward and increasing their commitments, what are called nationally determined contributions in the language of the convention. Those commitments need to be aligned with the global ambition to keep temperature rises to 1.5 degrees. And we need to see a rapid and equitable transition away from fossil fuels. And underpinning all this, we need to see nature mainstreamed across the whole of the convention. Looking ahead, India and South Korea are each bidding to host the conference in 2028, COP33. So the world expects major Asian economies to demonstrate leadership. There's an opportunity and a responsibility here for Japan. And indeed, more generally, it's so critical to stand up for multilateralism in today's world. So I've painted what might seem like quite a bleak picture with the impacts of climate change being fairly devastating for many species and ecosystems and governments failing to take enough action. But I think there are some good reasons for hope. For the last 21 consecutive months, China's carbon dioxide emissions have either been flat or falling. China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases across the world. So it's quite likely that China's carbon emissions may have already peaked. We won't know for a bit longer, but that's an incredibly positive trend. Around the world, we're seeing renewable energy is almost always cheaper than fossil fuels, and many countries are now making rapid progress in transitioning. And here in Japan, we're seeing increased investment in clean energy solutions, regulations requiring renewable energy to be developed, and some interesting technological developments as well. So the Ministry of Industry has committed to generating 20 gigawatts, that's the equivalent of 20 nuclear reactors, through a new type of solar panel made of perovskite. And this is light and flexible, and so it can be installed on the walls of buildings or on windows or car roofs or streetlights. And this could be revolutionary in scaling up the application of renewable energy. So in summary, birds are very useful for telling us about what's going on with the environment, and they show us that the impacts of climate change will be profound. It's absolutely critical, therefore, that we move fast and to a greatest degree as possible to cut greenhouse gas emissions. But we must also help birds and other species to adapt. Birds point us to the actions and responses that are needed, and BirdLife partners are implementing these across the world. But ultimately, it's governments that must take urgent action. To understand the climate crisis and its impacts on nature, we need good science. To learn more about what I've been talking about, I'd encourage you to visit the Data Zone on the BirdLife website, and there you can download a couple of our flagship reports, the State of the World's Birds, which we bring out every 4 years, and one that we produce focused specifically on birds and people and climate change called The Messengers. And I'll stop there. I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Butchart, and to Princess Takamado. I will now open the floor to questions. I would ask that everybody first identify yourself, and please limit yourself to one question and no speeches, please. Anthony, do you want to lead us off? And please identify yourself, Anthony.
Anthony Rowley, South China Morning Post. First, thank you, Your Highness, for gracing us with your presence today. I have a particular interest in the subject because I recently completed a book on the financial impact of climate change. But I would like to ask you personally how optimistic or pessimistic you are about the possibility of changing this very cynical attitude among certain political leaders. I don't need to name any names. By events of various kinds. Do you think this cynicism can be overcome or not? And just very quickly on birds migration, for you please, yes, and on bird migration, how much is this contributing to the spread of not just avian flu but pandemics in general, this changes in bird migration? Is it a contributor to the spread of various pandemics?
So I take the first question and Stuart takes the second one, yes?
The first question was addressed to you.
The first one, yes. I am an optimist. I've always been an optimist. And the overall picture is bleak. But I have, the human species has always been very resilient. The only problem is that just the human species surviving is not the answer. The human species, if it claims to be the most intelligent of all the life forms on Earth, has a responsibility to all the other life forms. And therefore, it's not just us that has to survive. We really want to have the Earth survive in the beautiful way in which the Earth exists at present. And whether we will be able to do that or not is a more difficult question. I think the human species will survive. The environment will survive even without the human species, yes? I mean, that is the most resilient. If the human species is gone, probably the environment will do better. So that will survive. It's a question of whether the human species survives and whether we are able to protect all the other species for which we should have we should be held responsible because we are the ones that have made it difficult for them. Particularly because, and I'm speaking a bit too much, but most species have adapted their bodies to various ecological niches. And the human species uses fire, it has clothes, it travels, it's invented all sorts of things. Therefore, the whole of the world is its habitat, thereby threatening the habitat of species that have adapted to specific niches. Yes? And the migration.
Basically, you are optimistic.
I am optimistic, yes.
So, avian flu is a natural disease of birds, but it doesn't cause any problems. It doesn't cause problems for people. It doesn't cause problems for wild birds. What has caused problems is highly pathogenic avian flu, And this is a disease that has evolved in the situation of incredibly high intensity factory farming of poultry. It's basically a chicken disease. It has now spread and infected wild birds, which are as much victims as we are, and poultry farmers and so on. And they can now carry this disease and spread it around the world. But that's causing problems as much for the world's birds as it is for people. More generally, pandemics can result from what are called zoonoses, where disease is spread from animals to people. Usually it's much more around mammals than birds. But the risks of this happening are increased as we degrade the environment more and more, because it brings people into close contact with wild animal populations. So all the solutions we need to put in place to conserve biodiversity are helping ourselves by helping to reduce the risks of this sort of disease transmission.
Okay. We will take one question for each of the people up here if you do want to ask two questions. Anybody else have a question? Dennis.
Yes, Dennis, excuse me, Dennis Normile of Science magazine. I'd like to ask Dr. Butchart, you talked about nature-based solutions, and you pointed out a number of small examples. Are there any examples of these solutions being scaled up to a point where they are having a real impact?
So there are certainly some that have hugely ambitious scale. So the Great Green Wall of Africa is an effort to regreen the Sahel from West Africa all the way across to Egypt and south by restoring degraded habitats to help benefit people, by reducing unsustainable grazing practices, by helping to reduce the risk of desertification and the loss of farmland. And this is the kind of scale that we need to see in order to help turn the tide. I don't think there are any yet that are demonstrable successes at that scale, but there are lots of more local examples where this is happening.
Okay. I have a question from a reporter online, which will go to Princess Takamado. And this is from Keiko Kurane from UCA News. And I'll read the question. While much of the conversation around bird conservation focuses on science and policy, the everyday choices of people are just as crucial. From your experience as an advocate and photographer, what practical actions or changes in mindset do you hope ordinary people, and especially young people in Japan, will take to protect birds and the natural world?
Thank you very much for the question. In the past, I used to strongly advocate that young people went outdoors and spent a lot of time outdoors in woodland, and to just sort of put themselves in a natural environment. But now with the increasing number of bears that we seem to have in Japan, I've stopped saying it quite so enthusiastically. One has to be careful. But having said that, I think it's extremely important that young people go outside. There's a world of difference between seeing something online and seeing something in its natural habitat. There's a world of difference between hearing birdsong online and going out and listening to it. And as we all know, the more we know about something, the more important it becomes. So in order to make young people environmentally aware, it's extremely important that the young people are out there. nowadays, I also hear that farming has become quite popular amongst young people. I think since COVID, having plants in the house or having a little patch has become slightly more popular than before. That sort of thing is a good thing because once you touch the soil, you realize there's so much more there that you didn't know before. And that interest is extremely important. So I would normally advise young people to just go outdoors and feel it all, absorb it all, and then to be aware of what's happening in terms of environment.
Get their hands dirty.
Get your hands dirty.
Calvin, you had a question?
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Your Highness, for coming here. And thank you, Doctor. My name is Khatun Azari. I'm for Pan-Orient News. My question is about this telephone. There are I read the reports that the signals from mobile phones and towers are disturbing the birds. And they are actually, I see here many studies. So do you think, like now, whenever I use the phone, I feel guilty a little bit about it. So do you think more attention also, other than climate change, should be given to this issue? Of course, it's a very big challenge, but maybe.
So this is one of those perennially popular stories that arises, but there isn't really any good evidence that, for example, 5G is causing issues for birds or insect populations, as far as we know. People tend to try and people like trying to come up with a single silver bullet that explains, what's happening across the broader environment. And this is it's not even a theory, but it's a proposal that comes up quite often. But really, there isn't any strong evidence for it. And compared to the threats that we know are having major impacts on sustainable agriculture, the unsustainable management of the world's forests, invasive species, unsustainable use, trapping and hunting, and climate change, these are the ones that are really driving biodiversity loss that we need to tackle.
Thank you.
If I could follow up, Dr. Butchart, I'm from the southeast of the United States. I'm from Georgia. And when I was a kid, when we would drive at night, you would strike so many insects that you would need an ice scraper to clean off your windshield. And these days, you can do a night drive and almost come home with a clean windshield. The insect population is tracking the bird. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, is that the same problems? Is there some sort of a mutual relationship there? Because I certainly see a decline in insects in my lifetime.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and it's really worrying. We obviously know far less about insect population trends for the sorts of reasons I described at the beginning. It's very difficult to identify them. There's massively high diversity. Most of them haven't even been described to science. So we don't really know what's going on with insect populations. But you get these sorts of anecdotal evidence like you're describing, that clearly we are losing our insect populations just as we are losing our bird populations. And there are a few studies that have come out more recently that have quantified trends and do show very worrying declines. And of course, that then impacts all of the other components of ecosystems. Many birds feed on insects, and so the loss of insects is just one mechanism by which the sort of factors I was just describing are impacting birds and other components of ecosystems.
Okay, does anybody else have a question you would like to ask? Simon?
Simon Farrell from Custom Media for Stuart. Sorry if this is a stupid question, but what are the latest developments in gene editing and DNA and other sciences for reintroducing extinct species like the lovable dodo?
There's no stupid questions, but that's another controversial one. It's a great story, isn't it? We've all seen Jurassic Park, and the idea that we could bring back dinosaurs and other extinct species is a the companies that are involved in promoting this like to make a big splash and get news coverage, and as journalists and the media, you enjoy telling those stories because they are so engaging. But the actual genetic developments that they are making are nowhere near equivalent to bringing a species back from the dead. So yes, you can make a mouse that has much hairier fur, rather like woolly mammoths did compared to elephants, but that's not reintroducing or recreating elephants. There was a claim that an extinct species called the dire wolf had been brought back, and they profiled a couple of the pups that had been born, but they just had a few genes that were for traits that were shared by that extinct species. It's not bringing them back from the dead. So we are nowhere near the possibility of being able to recreate these species. Even if you did, where would you put woolly mammoths? The world has changed. The ecosystems that they originally occurred in no longer occur, or they are under the intense pressures of the nature that I was just describing. There are some potentially powerful possibilities in terms of genetics trying to deal with some of these invasive species we were talking about, those mosquitoes in Hawaii. There are now techniques where you can release sterile males, and that then drives declines in the mosquito populations. This is good for people. These mosquitoes are not native to this place, and people don't enjoy getting bitten by them, and it's good for the birds and other biodiversity as well. So there may be some opportunities for using genetics to solve challenges like that, but bringing species back from extinction, not going to happen anytime soon.
We have a long history as a species of modifying other species that are still living, right? Dogs, for example. Can we train some of these endangered birds or somehow breed them to bring out traits that would make them more survivable?
There may be a few incredibly niche examples of some aspects of that. But we don't need to do that. Birds and wild species more generally, have great genetic variation. They have evolved over millions of years and have dealt with great changes in our environment. The challenge is the pace at which it's happening now. You look at those graphs of carbon dioxide emissions, and they're a long flat line, and then it just incredibly spikes in literally the last few decades or century or two, and that is the challenge. We don't need incredibly sophisticated solutions. We know what needs to happen. We just need to implement it at a far greater scale and pace.
You and then you. Yeah, and then you, and then you, John, sir. Anybody else?
This is not meant to be a facetious question, Your Highness, but do you think a coalition of royals could help in this fight again? The reason I ask this is my country is England, and King Charles, when he was Prince Charles, showed very keen interest in climate issues, and that seems to have rubbed off onto younger people and so on. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands formed an organisation, the name of which just escapes me, but which brings together world leaders in rather low-profile meetings. I don't know whether there are any other royals, but our political leaders don't seem to be doing a particularly good job in fighting climate change. So do you think maybe there'd be more respect if royalty were to get together and put the message over?
Thank you for the question. Yes, His Majesty, I visited the name's suddenly gone, the house that they have in Gloucestershire. What is it? Bagshot? No. Anyway, I've been there and seen all the various different environmental experiments that His Majesty has been doing for probably about 50 years now, 40 years, 50 years. Prince Bernhard was very supportive of the Netherlands, was very supportive of BirdLife when it was originally being founded. At the moment, Prince Albert of Monaco is a supporter in a champion species for BirdLife. So, in actual fact, and I know that the Prince of Wales is also a champion, as is the the King of Spain. So, in fact, I think probably all royal family members are, in some way or form, champions for the environment. I don't know that we've all, we get together for it, but we do talk about it when sometimes when we meet, and for some things, I think Prince William was there in Nice or in Monaco for the sea conference. I can't remember what it is, but Monaco was hosting it. I was invited, but I couldn't go. But that sort of thing does happen. And yes, you're right. I think that most members of royal families are very aware of the various environmental issues.
Sir.
Peter Lyon with Forbes magazine. Thank you, Your Highness, and Dr. Butchart for this very important presentation. I think we all appreciate it. Dr. Butchart, you mentioned that the awareness and interest level in the environment is very low in Japan. And as we know, the Japanese are also very far behind in terms of EV, electric vehicle uptake, which would help to reduce emissions, of course. How do you believe that Japan can change the situation, can improve the situation, can increase awareness among the Japanese? Thank you.
I'm not an expert on Japan. I've been here about a week, and it's only my second trip. I was last here in 1999, so there are many more in the room who will know more about the situation here. I think there is growing awareness and recognition that more action needs to be taken. A lot of it starts in schools, educating our children and our youth, and across the world, actually, awareness and concern for environmental issues is far greater in younger generations and is continuing to grow generation by generation. That there is a particular challenge wherever there are strong industrial interests in maintaining the status quo. It's what we're seeing across the world, including in some countries whose recent actions have had a major impact on geopolitics. But we somehow need to hold our politicians to account, and ultimately politicians do respond to what the public are interested in and concerned about. And so I think it's encouraging that there is growing awareness amongst younger people, and hope that things will improve as the next generation of political leaders takes power. But within Japan, I'm probably not best placed to answer that.
Can I just add, it's not in addition to what Dr. Butchart was saying. In terms of the development of EV, I think we were slightly late because we spent so much time working on the hybrid. And when my late husband went to test the cars for EV and hybrid, at that time, the argument was that electric cars need to have electricity made first in order for it to function. And therefore, we were still using fossil fuel, whereas hybrid was at that time a sort of more environmentally friendly type of car. And so we had a hybrid for a very long time. But I think because we didn't shift to EV until late, that is probably one of the reasons why we're slightly behind everybody else in terms of the development of EV.
Any other questions from the audience? Dennis?
You've touched on this several times, but I believe you said that 15% of the Japanese are skeptical about climate change. Does this mean that 85% recognize climate change as a threat? That sounds like a pretty substantial majority to me. And also you mentioned that business leaders have been in the forefront of setting targets for reducing emissions. With this 85% support and business leaders, what is the sticking point? Why is Japan's per capita emissions still so high? And why is it still so reliant on fossil fuels?
So it was a study that the Ministry of Environment carried out. I don't know the exact wording of the questions that they asked, but it was 15% are sceptical about the importance of climate change or oppose the transition to renewable energies. But you're right, the flip side of that does imply that a large proportion of people recognise that this is an issue and something needs to be done about it. I think the answer to the second part of your question, so if businesses want it to happen, why isn't it happening, is because of the powerful lobbies of particular parts of industry. There are people out there who are making huge amounts of money, even more in the last week or two, as a result of our status quo, where we're reliant upon fossil fuels, particularly so in this country, and so trying to shift that is challenging because the resources that are poured into lobbying politicians to maintain that status quo dwarf the resources available to the environmental movement who are trying to persuade politicians to do something better and greener and more healthy for the planet, and that's one of the major challenges.
Sorry, question over here. It was
Yes, this one.
you. It was you. Yeah. The last question. Do you want to go? Yes. Yes. Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Patricia Bader Johnston. I'm sorry I'm not a journalist, but I've been teaching sustainability in graduate schools for about 15 or so years. I'm an associate member here. And I would like to first say thank you to Princess Takamoto for your enduring passion in this topic for so many years. You've made such a huge impact. And picking up one of the comments you made about the increasing interest of young people in gardening, for instance, I think that there's a very low level of awareness of the impact of our food supply chain actually on biodiversity. And I wonder if, Dr. Butchart, you could also comment a little bit about the impact of what we eat, factory farming, the loss of biodiversity, and how that impacts birds. Thank you.
Yeah, so one of the questions earlier on was, what can people do about it? And I think making more informed choices as consumers is really key. We're all consumers. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, the way we travel, and the things that we own. And there are greener options available in many cases. And for those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to exert such choices, it's really important that we do so. There are products that have greater impacts on the planet, foods that are driving more deforestation than others, and so making choices that are mindful of the environmental consequences is one small thing that individuals can do, as well as holding our governments to account and using our votes to try and bring about the political changes that are needed for a healthier planet and a more sustainable future.
Yes, of course.
It's nothing to do with the question that Patricia so kindly asked, But as I was thinking of the use of fossil fuel, I was just remembering that I was in Iceland last year in October for the Arctic Assembly, Arctic Circle Assembly. And because it is probably the one country in the world that isn't affected by the fossil fuel crisis because it relies on geothermal energy. I was just thinking about it, and I suddenly thought I hadn't mentioned in my first, not introduction, but in my first speech, one of the major issues that was brought home to me over the years since I've been involved with the polar regions. And that interest started originally when I visited the Arctic North in Canada and then Greenland and Iceland. The Arctic sea ice is vastly diminished. In the past, there used to be multi-year ice. There is no longer any multi-year ice. It's one-year ice. One-year ice has lots of air bubbles and therefore is extremely fragile. The current will get into it if we have the opening of the Northern Passage and there is a lot of ships going around, then that will melt that ice even more. Now, we all know that if there is the equator and if there is a polar region, then that is how the air conditioning system works for the world, yes? So we need that bit of ice so that it controls the flow of air, it controls the flow of water, so currents, winds, everything, the Gulf Stream included. The loss of that ice and the loss of the capacity to disseminate the heat into the air is what is causing a lot of this climate change. And that is, and now, two days ago, I think, there was a newspaper article that said that our Antarctic survey ship had discovered that for 2 years running or 3 years running, they have been able to get through a strait where an area where in the past they needed icebreakers, and they can get through that without any icebreaker because there's just a little bit of ice floating around. That means that the Antarctic is also losing its ice sheet. And the loss of these two polar regions and the ice in these two polar regions will have tremendous impact. It's already showing impact. When I came back from Iceland, there was the news that there was flooding in Southeast Asia, and that's one of the signs that will happen with the loss of this ice. So one of the things I was going to say originally, and I didn't mention, was that there has to be a lot of international agreement on what to do with the ice. But once we've lost that ice, it will be extremely difficult to create ice again. In order to buy time, the one thing we can do is to try and maintain that ice as much as possible. That's both in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, but the Arctic, it's more of a crisis at the moment. Engineers need to be onto this. International organizations have to be behind this. The countries have different ideas of how to develop the Arctic, but if we could put that development on hold for just a little bit so that we can buy time, that would probably make a huge difference. And that, at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, seems to be something that affects, because it's so strongly behind climate change, affects everything and all the work that we do at BirdLife. A lot of the work we do will perhaps be for naught if we lose that ice. And so I was going to say at the beginning that ice was something that was very much at the top of my mind, but I didn't say it. So I think maybe I'd like to say it now, because you can do your own research on it. Just don't take my word for it. But the loss of ice in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, of course the glaciers as well, but in those two polar regions, and the addressing of that is of paramount importance as far as climate change is concerned.
Can I ask one last question that brings us back to Japan? Is there anything in any of the realms that you're looking at that is interesting or worth noting that's happening here in Japan that we should talk about, that maybe we don't cover as much as we should in the media? Could you point out something interesting? Or?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the fact that more Japanese companies have set emissions reductions targets than any other country is really noteworthy. So under what's called the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, this is an initiative to help support companies to assess and disclose their impacts on biodiversity, and under the Science-Based Targets Initiative, an initiative to support companies to set targets for reducing their emissions. Japan is really leading the way, and I think that's a really positive and encouraging trend that we should be encouraging.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we have come to the end of our session. I first want to present honorary one-year memberships to both of our guests. Dr. Butchart, we hope that you come back again less than 17 years in the future. And to encourage you, this is a one-year membership at the club. And to Princess Takamado as well, we hope to see you again soon. So, and thank you so much for coming and joining us. And can I go to you first?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And I let it, for the audience, please remain seated while the guests leave first, and then we will wrap up the event. But thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thank you.